All right, welcome back to the program. My guests are joining me right now. We have quite a lot to dig into. Kelvin Emmanuel is the Chief Executive Officer at Dairy Hills Limited. He's with me here in the studio, while Tajuddin Ibrahim, the Director of Research and Strategy, Chapel Hill, Denham, joins us virtually in Lagos. Hello, Mr. Ibrahim. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel, here for joining us. Let me get started with you,
Thank you.
Kelvin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
What did you think of Mr. President's speech? Was it presidential
I, I,
for you?
I
The
think
language, the character of the speech?
I,
Let's start
I
from there.
think the speech went straight to the point. The speech enforced the removal of FX and petrol subsidy. I was a bit disappointed though with this idea of reviewing the Minimum Wage Act to raise a blanket minimum wage, considering that there are quite a number of states that still have not been able to pay minimum wage. I maintain that the way to address the issue of increase in minimum wage is to allow state governors to drive it, not by giving a blanket increase. But overall, I think the speech touched on the right areas. And for me, the right areas, the two most important areas, which has been a drain on Nigerian economy and has set the economy back 13 trillion naira, is petrol and FX subsidy. That's the elephant in the room. And he responded to the statement by the Economic Intelligence Unit that I am totally aghast with, and I think it is out of place. The president reinforced the fact that petrol and FX subsidy is gone, and is gone for good.
When you're talking about minimum wage, I'd like to understand what you mean there, but hold your thoughts while I come to Mr. Ibrahim in Lagos. President's speech was titled, "After Darkness Comes the Glorious Dawn." Where's darkness coming from? His party, uh, his party was in power in the last 8 years. He's continuing what President Buhari left. So what darkness is he talking about? In your own understanding, is it about the fuel subsidy gone issue, or what exactly is after darkness comes the glorious dawn, and what glorious dawn should Nigerians be expecting that they will wake up to?
Thank you very much, Nancy, for having me on the show today. I think the darkness that we are referring to, that I interpret that the president was referring to, are all the issues and the challenges that Nigerians are currently facing. It is not necessarily because of what his party had done in the past, but also partly or largely speaking, what previous administrations, had done to this country. And I think, it is there now to correct some of those, mistakes that the previous administrations had made, and also to put Nigeria on a much stronger and sustainable, footing in terms of economic recovery and also economic growth, and importantly, economic development, because each of those elements is different from the other. And if we take a look at take a bigger look at the picture, what we will probably recognize is there is a deliberate focus on the medium, nano, small, enterprises in Nigeria. And I think that is remarkable. It is remarkable because of the contribution of those businesses to this economy that we call Nigeria. So we have well around 48% of Nigeria's GDP being represented by the nano, small, and medium enterprises. So when you address the challenges of that kind of a segment, then you will see the impact on your economy as a whole. And by then, we'll be talking about a bright dawn indeed. It is not something that is going to change rapidly within a few months, but we need beyond even 1 year for us to begin to smile and see those positive impacts that these policies, will lead us to. So let us give it beyond 1 year, and all of us probably are going to agree that we indeed have remarkable changes in that regard. But I reckon that there are still areas that were not touched by the president. And in terms of addressing the nation, I would advise the president to ensure that he addresses Nigerians on a quarterly basis and give outlook for the coming quarter. If on a quarterly basis is too frequent, what about having, addressing Nigeria on, twice in a year, every 6 months? Let us know what the state of the nation is, and then what is the outlook for the next 6 months. I think it will be a remarkable development if this administration can, can maintain that kind of a standard. Those are my views.
Okay, Ibrahim, let me stick with you a bit. From what you said, that you were still expecting more from Mr. President's speech, does that mean perhaps you are a bit underwhelmed in certain areas? And I would like to know what those certain areas are. Then secondly, do you think that from his speech on Monday night, do you think that this was a knee-jerk response to perhaps the economic hardship that many Nigerians are facing? And does it also seem that Mr. President is a listening president?
I think it is more of him being a listening president, and it is not so much of a knee-jerk reaction because, when you have a knee-jerk reaction, such reactions are not always articulate and they are not always precise to the point. But this, reaction of his is an indication that they already have a plan. It is just that he came to address and communicate those plans to Nigerians. So in terms of, the areas, I think what he announced yesterday are, largely speaking, small relative to the potential of Nigerians and also of the economy as a whole. If you consider the fact that in this country we have around 40 million MSMEs, and we are looking to support around 100,000 of them. I think that is small, but it is something that can be improved upon because it represents 0.25% of the total, 40 million MSMEs in the country. And the importance of that sector, I say it again, is that it is estimated to contribute close to 48% of Nigeria's GDP, which means if you focus more on that sector, and some of the key problems they have are: number one, access to capital; number two, the cost of capital. And this is what Mr. President is looking to address in this case. It is just coming in small size, in my view, relative to the big size of that segment. The second element that sounds like a concern to me is security. He mentioned and talked about agriculture. It is good to have plans for the farmers in terms of provision of fertilizer and also in terms of supplying grains from our reserves. But the question is, how secured are those farmers in their farms to be able to produce more and take them to the city? How relatively cheap is it for them to transport their goods from the farms to the cities where they are consumed? So those are some of the areas that I think were missing in the speech, but I sense that there will be plans to address those at some point, in my view.
Okay, let me come back to you, Kelvin. What are the highlights for you in this speech? Because in fact, I say it off camera. I said President Tinubu has made my work more, tedious, because it seems every day he's giving me one content or the other. I don't know if you feel the same way in terms of I'm getting something economic. So I really have been on my toes since this administration came in. Unlike President Buhari, that you'll be looking for something where there's nothing, as it were. So for President's speech on Monday night, for his speech, what were the highlights for you? Because let's break down those numbers now and what those numbers mean, as well as the execution. Because like I said during my intro, I was a bit underwhelmed in terms of the execution of this plan from the President's speech. It seemed to me that this was someone that was also like rehashing what was in his manifesto, or what? Please vote for me. I'm going to give 50 billion to these people. I'm going to give. Do you understand? In terms of execution, I did not really say it, and I really don't also know if that his speech would give us more of execution. Though also in that speech, when I listened to him yesterday, I heard that he mentioned development financial institutions. So from there, I was assuming, okay, would the BOIs, what's the name of Development Bank of Nigeria, would the central bank have a role to play here and all of that? So what do you think?
Well, to be honest with you, 15 minutes is 15 or 20 minutes is a very short time for him to bring up like a detailed plan. But I
No,
tell
in
you,
terms of how does this money, because that was what people were asking yesterday.
look,
I got a barrage of calls and
the 1
messages.
trillion,
How are these monies going to be expended?
first of all, the 1 trillion naira that he has saved from not implementing under recovery for PMS subsidy, um, it brings to bear a legal problem, a legal challenge. Under what legal framework are they saving 1 trillion naira that is meant for the federating units outside of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority that has infrastructure fund, future generation fund, and a third one now.
A savings fund.
A savings fund.
Yes.
Right?
Three funds.
Secondly, the most important factor that determines the price of PMS is the exchange rate. So, for example, right now, he talked about intervention, that they are monitoring the market and intervention. And when you consider that 85 to 90% of the supply of FX is done by the CBN, because the CBN is the market maker. Yes, they've devalued and floated the exchange rate. Yes, they've created a forwards market, both for exchange-traded derivatives and for non-exchange traded derivatives. Now you have the issue of supply because you have backlogs for letters of credit, matured letters of credit, capital and dividend remittances for Form A. How do you solve that problem? There are ways to go about solving the problem at a central bank level, right? And personally, I've looked at it. How do you go about bringing liquidity into the FX markets in Nigeria? Since the foreign direct investors and foreign portfolio investors, FPIs are complaining that the Nigerian treasury bill yields are not floating to convexity to match up with inflation to interest yield curve for them to bring their money in, because it's going to bring negative interest on yield on returns for their investments. Number one. Number two, they are complaining about there's backlog. How do you want us to bring our money in? Because we can't see the road to take our money back out if we want to take it out in 12 or 18 months, right? So the disincentive to foreign investors bringing in money to match up with liquidity, given that the government-owned enterprises like NNPC that remitted 124 billion naira worth of US dollars to the government for this past month to FAC, and NLNG that did a half-year return withholding taxes about $699 million, and then dividends of about $1.1 billion through NNPC, is not bringing in enough liquidity that you need to supply the markets. You have intercentral bank lending, foreign support line available by the issuer of the currency, the US dollar that is in question. It's been used by the Swiss National Bank, it's been used by the European Central Bank, it's been used by the Bank of Japan. If you don't have credit with the US government in terms of US treasuries, you can go and pledge your sovereign, your special drawing rights at IMF as a collateral to get liquidity to fund the backlog you have in the system and to shock the markets. The foreign exchange markets in Nigeria needs liquidity that will bring the rates down to a level where it crosses a psychological low for people who hold FX to be able to start offloading their FX.
Yes, the question is, where will that FX come from? Because even Mr. President did also mention in paragraph, we were talking about it just before we went on, in paragraph 38, he said we're also monitoring the effects of exchange rate and inflation on gasoline prices. If and when necessary, we will intervene. Where the answer to my question is coming from, would they dip hands into the foreign exchange reserves?
Well, to be honest with you,
because the supply is limited. So where's the supply going to come from?
To be honest with you, I don't even trust the reserve numbers that are given.
Really, by the central bank?
I don't trust it, you know.
You think it's lesser, or we don't have
I
at all?
think it's lesser. I think it's
than
lesser.
what we have now, about $34 billion?
Yes, I think it's lesser than $34 billion. But I actually believe that it's time for the Nigerian government to sit down and tell itself the truth that you need a foreign support line for the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Have we gotten to that point?
We've gotten to that point because
Where
you
you
need to
have-
shock. Exchange rate determines the price of PMS.
Yes, I know
If
that.
you provide 50,000 naira to all the families in Nigeria and then PMS prices goes up another 15% within the next 3 months, the 50,000 naira palliative you're providing for them is not going to do them anything.
But this is a central bank that has foreign exchange reserves of about $34 billion, which will be more than enough for 6 to 9 months imports. So why would you say you don't have confidence
There's a
in
principle that says that you should not draw your exchange rate reserves lower than your external debt. Nigeria's external debt is $43 billion. So if your exchange rate reserve is at $34 billion, and
that
I
means
don't
you're already
trust that
in
number,
deficit.
you're already in deficit.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Mr. Ibrahim, you've been hearing the conversation between me and Emmanuel here. What are your views concerning what the president has enumerated? If we take a look at the numbers now, I don't know if we should break it down again for our viewers, but we can actually break it down. And let me just quickly go through it because we broke it down for our viewers. 50 billion naira each to cultivate 150,000 hectares of rice and maize. I hope you speak on that because you're also a farmer. 50 billion naira each to cultivate 100,000 hectares of wheat and cassava, to invest 100 billion naira to acquire 3,000 units of CNG field gases. Field buses, will that be enough for the whole country? MSMEs to get 125 billion naira, 50 billion naira to be given to nano businesses. And nano, in this case, in Nigeria, a nano business means a business that is run, a very micro, a very tiny business that employs like 1 to 3 people, like a family-oriented kind of business. These nano businesses will be given 50,000 naira each in 774 local government areas, and those businesses will be 1,300 businesses. So among others, what do you think of these? The implementation, which I asked Kelvin earlier.
Okay, so let us look at it this way. There are two things that could have happened. Number one is that the government does not do anything, and at that point, it means zero allocation to all these businesses. And the second thing to consider is that the government does something small, which is, if we talk about nano businesses, for instance, a nano business owner cannot compare 0 naira with 50,000 naira. So they would rather go for 50,000 naira than have nothing. That is one. The second thing is that, what does a nano business need to support his or her business? They possibly do not need excessive capital. What they need is something sizable to underpin the level of capital that they have. And if you give, when we say nano business, maybe we should try to break it down a bit so that we have a good understanding of what we are referring to. We call a nano business a nano business of, like, what we call mama put, for lack of better language, right?
Yeah.
So what
the
you do is that,
the akara seller.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
so an akara seller, for instance, that you give 50,000 naira to madam, please support your business with this, will be a lot, happy, happier compared to you giving her nothing. So that is number one. The second thing around implementation, I think, implementation should not be difficult, unless if we don't want to be truthful to ourselves in this country. All these business owners have bank accounts. Those that do not have, they have children that have bank accounts. Those that do not have children have reliable relatives that have bank accounts. And I think worst scenario that we could see is for them to collect cash. So I think the implementation, to my mind, should not be difficult. The government would just collect their their bank verification number, their BVN, and then their account is credited. So what could be a challenge, to my mind, is how they are able to pay back. And that will be reflected in the level of discipline Nigerians themselves have. So if you are complaining of capital as a challenge to your business, that your business is not growing because you do not have capital, now here comes somebody that says to you, take this money to run your business. and I give you at the lowest interest rates you can find in the country at 9%. If you are a disciplined business owner, you should be able to run your business profitably in a way that you will be able to service, that debt. I think that is another angle to look at it. Speaking the truth to ourselves also, as Nigerians. When we now consider, what he has said about farming, I think that is also, remarkable. But my sense is security. As I said earlier, farmers should be safe in their farms to be able to go in there and plant crops and harvest easily without any threats to their lives or to their farmland. So those are some of the elements that the government should consider to add. If we if we take our attention away from Nano and we go to those enterprises that will be getting between 500 million to 1 billion per enterprise, I think that is also a material development for enterprises that are genuinely doing businesses and that are also focused on ensuring that they add value. Let us look at some of them. If we have machineries to put in place and you have a 1 billion naira that can help you to secure that machine that you need or equipment for your business at around 200 million to 300 million, then you can use the rest for other purposes to propel the growth of your business. I think Nigerians
Okay.
should consider embracing this, in my view.
Okay, Tajuddin, let me stick with you for just a few seconds. If I heard you right, the worst case scenario for nano businesses should be to give them cash if they don't have bank accounts, if they don't have children or relatives that do have bank accounts. Are we going back to the trader money days? And what kind of model do you think that will be effective so that these monies can get to the people it should get to and not political jobbers, as it were, or let it be political compensations to their cronies? We saw perhaps what happened in the COVID era. Nigerians don't want to go back to that. So how do you think this should be implemented? Should that be a system whereby is it that people will go online and apply just like we saw for the COVID-19 loan? A lot of people went online. Many people also got loans without even knowing people. Some got loans because they also know people. Some did not also get at all. So what kind of model should we apply in this? And number two, very quickly, where do you think that this money is coming from? Because the president was not exactly clear from where we are getting this money. You mentioned earlier the 1 trillion savings. Is this also from the $800 million World Bank loan? Do you have a clarity on that?
So I have little or no clarity on it, but my sense is that 1 trillion naira savings in subsidy. I think Nigerians should understand that this is a government, and the government has the plan to spend well over 20 trillion or thereabouts this year. The deficit in the budget is around 11 trillion. So if you said we have saved 1 trillion naira, it doesn't possibly, in my mind, imply that we have it saved somewhere. It is just that it can be partly implemented to cover our deficits. That is one area that is very possible. In terms of implementing the nano lending, I think the government can consider registration of those businesses. That, to my mind, is the starting point. And I think they should adopt whatever strategy that they adopt to pay salaries to civil servants. I'm not sure we have seen any civil servants that has come out and say that I was not paid my salary for the past month because my salary was paid to a politician or my salary was paid to another person. So there's a way government, pays salary to their staff, to the civil servants. They can consider whatever strategy they use in that regard to ensure that the 50,000 naira gets into the right hands. I think those are my views.
Okay. Calvin, your views on the smallholder farmers getting fertilizers and monies. Your views also about the 75 enterprises. I was particularly curious when Mr. President announced that for those 75 enterprises to get 1 billion naira. And for me, okay, that should be in the manufacturing sector. And I was like, okay, how do we get those 75 enterprises? Just speak on that. Then your views as to where the money will also come from, because Tajudeen was saying there seems to be no clarity. I was struggling with Mr. President while he was speaking yesterday. I said, okay, is this from the $800 million loan? I said, okay, should I reach over to the World Bank guys and all of that? So clarity on that. We also know there's a ministerial screening going on. Perhaps when there's a finance minister, his cabinet will give us a breakdown of all this more. So quite a whole lot I was struggling with yesterday.
Well, you know, concerning smallholder farmers, I like to address issues from a systemic institutional point, because I believe that the way to really solve problems is not by giving handouts, even if handouts is a populist, is politically correct, and is politically expedient. I will not argue
or
against
economically
it.
expedient at this time that the country is facing economic hardship. Come on, Kelvin.
Well,
handouts are also
I'll tell
being
you,
given in
I'll
other
tell you,
climes
I'll tell you
when
this.
the economy is not
I'll
in
tell
good
you
shape.
this. I'll tell you this.
Yes.
Fertilizer prices are going up. Fertilizer prices are going up above 30,000 naira per bag. 4 years ago, a bag of fertilizer was somewhere around 5,000 to 7,000 naira. What happened between 2019 and 2023?
Inflation.
Exchange rate, inflation, Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay. Recently, Lithuania banned Russia from moving its fertilizer through Belarus to the Black Sea. It's potash. Potash is one of the 3 components of blending fertilizer. Nigeria has only ammonium nitrate gas. It doesn't have potash. It doesn't have phosphorus. They import phosphorus from OCP Morocco. Okay, so 70% of your supply chain for blending fertilizer in Nigeria, about 62 blending plants in Nigeria, comes from North Africa and Eastern Europe and North America, Canada. Look at your supply chain. How do you decouple your supply chain to reduce inflation? Because fertilizer is a major component for food inflation in Nigeria.
So are you saying
How do you
that
do
this
that?
palliative for fertilizer, 225,000 metric tons of fertilizers, will not boost crop production? Are you saying it's not necessary?
The Presidential Fertilizer Initiative over the last several years, hundreds of billions of naira that was implemented, didn't have any impact on food inflation. If it did, we'll see it in the prices of food.
So would you give Mr. President a chance to see how he would implement this? Then we can actually come back and critique and say...
Nancy, the real work, the hard work, is creating supply chain for backward integration of phosphorus and muriate of potash in Nigeria. Dangote signed an MOU in Togo to mine potash, so he doesn't have to import potash, so he can blend NPK fertilizer in a Beju Lekki. That is the real work. So how does the president invite business leaders who are in that sector, stakeholders, to a meeting and say, guys, how do we mine potash and phosphorus in Nigeria? Because Nigeria has phosphorus and potassium as minerals in Nigeria. Yeah. How do you engage the Ministry of Solid Minerals to unlock it? Now, this comes back to the question of your exclusive lists, your concurrent lists, and the control, and how you having a minister sitting in Abuja superintending over solid minerals in 36 states of Nigeria does nothing.
So are you saying that the 225,000, because I'm trying, you said it won't really go anywhere from history, but will this help unlock, because for inflation, food is a big component of it. Do you think that it will help ameliorate the pains of farmers?
The president needs
if they give you part of the 225,000 metric tons, won't you collect?
I will collect.
Okay.
But
won't it do stuff for you on your farm?
How much am I in the equation for food production in Nigeria?
Many of you, that's what I'm saying, for those of you that are farmers.
Exactly. So the question now is, how do you implement it? Okay? How do you, the smallholder farmer, I'll tell you on the ground, the smallholder farmers, the smallholder farmer that probably has only 75,000 naira in his bank account and has only 1.5 plot of land and is growing maize, and his 1.5 plot of land is only able to produce 5 metric tons per year. What is 5 metric tons in the grand scheme of things? What challenges do they have? They have challenge of opening land. That's where the National Land Development Agency comes in, NALDA. How do you come in with heavy equipment, with bulldozers, with payloaders to see that you can open land for them. The cost of diesel is about 650 to 700 naira, depending on where you are in Nigeria. And you need about 200 liters of diesel per day to open 1 hectare of land. How do they fund that? You need fertilizer, you need herbicides, you need pesticides, you need insecticides, you need seeds, you need hybrid seeds, you need tractors. It will take you about 150 liters of diesel a day to power a tractor. It will cost you 150,000 naira per day to rent a bulldozer, depending on the part of Nigeria you're in. How do the smallholder farmers that have 50, 20, 75, 100,000 naira as their total life savings afford that? These are the questions the president should be asking himself.
How about the issue of the supply of grains from the strategic grains reserve?
It's not going to do anything to bring down prices. And I'll tell you why. Nigeria has an import restriction on maize, and it gave waivers to 6 companies to bring in maize into Nigeria. Those 6 companies are not able to use that waivers because of the issues for sourcing FX in Nigeria. Yeah. Maize prices are somewhere around 350,000 naira per metric ton today. Okay. If you're going to bring down the price of grains that you need to blend animal feeds, for example, that will bring down the price of chicken, egg, and so many other derivatives that come from it, you need to increase the supply of maize and soybean. So number one is either you import, which will be affected by exchange rate, or you increase production. You need somewhere between 7 and 10 million metric tons of maize and soybean to be able to bring down the price of chicken and eggs in Nigeria.
So what do you think would be the solution? Should the other borders be opened?
Temporarily, the president needs to reverse the import restriction on maize that was given to only 6 companies and allow the markets to bring in maize, to crash down the price of maize so that the price of animal feed, especially poultry feeds, can go down temporarily. But the long-term solution, which is a difficult problem to solve, it's not an easy problem to solve. It's not a problem you can solve in 12 months. The long-term solution that he has to pay attention to and do the hard work is actually paying attention to the supply chain for growing grains in Nigeria. Soybean, maize, wheat. You have a Flour Mills Association of Nigeria, sugar. There's an import restriction on sugar given to only 3 companies. You have to remove that import restriction.
How about even for rice? Because they will say, okay, we are producing our rice now, we're doing our rice now, but yet rice is expensive. We are not importing rice. So
there is a security problem in the north. A lot of the rice paddy that is used in Nigeria is smuggled into Nigeria from the Francophone West Africa. The president needs to make judgment calls on whether he is going to remove the import restriction and allow rice paddy to come into Nigeria, or allow rice to come into Nigeria, and I'm encouraged by the fact that he's included food supply into the national security basket. I'm hoping that the combined forces of Nigerian Air Force, the Navy, and the Army are going to sweep in and ensure that farmers can go back and farmers don't have to pay bandit levy for going to their farms.
Or harvest allowance.
Okay,
how about the issue, just before I go over to Tajuddin, how about the issue of hectares of lands? Because the president also mentioned in his speech yesterday that they will cultivate, that's the agriculture we're talking about, they will cultivate hundreds of thousands of hectares. The land is in custody of the states. I didn't get clarity on that too. Would he collaborate with the state governors on this right now?
This calls for the revision of the Land Use Act. And Nancy, you know, anytime we bring up this conversation, I go back to fiscal federalism and the fact that the structure of the government is faulty. The structure of the government where you have so much control in Abuja and every state has to come to Abuja to kiss the ring of the president is faulty. If you really want to unlock productivity in Nigeria, you need to amend the Legislative Act and ensure that it's fiscal federalism. And the governors are given more control over their states. And the governors are giving control over their states to the extent where in some quarters they can remit royalties to the federal government, as opposed to them coming to FACT to calculate their monthly allocation.
Just one more with you before I move over to Tajuddin. You talked about minimum wage that the president did talk about. I want you to provide clarity on that, because I assume that Mr. President was talking about, you have federal civil servants, you also have public servants. So it's not only states. States have their own too. So the president has actually promised that there will be a minimum wage review upwardly. So what exactly is your grounds with that?
So I'll tell you what my grounds is. If he accedes to the request of the Nigerian Labour Congress, which is not bad, to raise the minimum wage It's an easy solution to a difficult problem. What he is going to do is that the government workers are going to have an increase in their salary, but the private and unorganized labor, I saw him praising the private sector, and I'm like, does the president know that there are so many banks in Nigeria that has 80% of contract staff? It's against employee casualization. Is he aware? What he needs to tackle is wage indexation, where in some ways wages can track inflation and CPI. What he needs to tackle is the fact that manufacturing companies and a lot of private sector companies, large companies that do over 10 billion naira per year, actually have 75–80% of their staffs on payroll through HR outsourcing. It's illegal in other parts of the world. The National Assembly, the Senate, needs to pass legislation that will strengthen labor laws and make it illegal for companies to maintain more than 20 or 25% of their payroll on contracts through HR outsourcing. It's illegal in other parts of the world. Allow the states to implement minimum wage based on the capacity of the states. What Lagos State can pay at about 650 billion naira of IGR per year is not the same with what Zamfara or Benue State can pay. Some states get 2 billion naira per month and they have irrevocable standing payment orders on their accounts.
Finances. Now, the question is, but the president, okay, now let's take a look at this way. The president has also the authority to say, I'm going to upwardly review the minimum wage, even if it's for my people alone. Let states now go figure that out, because from the removal of this fuel subsidy and all of that, they have more naira, supposedly, that comes to them every month. But the larger question also would be, even if you are going to upwardly revise the minimum wage to what Labour had ab initio asked, 200,000 naira, the question really will be, how much can a naira buy? What should be the value of the naira? If I take 50,000 naira to the market now, you'll be looking for what you bought, actually. So perhaps the larger question, mid to long term, should be, how do we strengthen the naira? How do we bring down inflation?
Yes.
How do we tackle the structural challenges that impact other value chains across the economy, insecurity and all of that?
But while we tackle that, we also have to tackle the fact that we have weak labor laws and there is abuse of people in unorganized labor in Nigeria.
Okay, agreed. Tajuddin, I know you've been listening to this conversation. Has it really been interesting for you listening to Ross on this part? You are over there in Lagos. And what do you also think about, I need to bring it in because I know we'll be going anytime soon to the National Assembly, where the ministerial screening will continue. What do you think? These guys, these men and women, they have their job cut out for them, isn't it? Were you impressed yesterday with the kind of questioning and with the kind of attitude that you saw from legislators yesterday?
Well, I think I didn't watch those interview sessions, but I reckon that we have a list that looks less promising because of the components. Not more than 50% of that list, are people that we can regard as technocrats. We have a lot of politicians in that list, and I think it is reflective of what Nigerian government has done in the past. But what I think is more important is for the president to bear in mind that the outstanding names that are yet to be added, like maybe 11 or 12 or thereabouts, possibly should be all technocrats, so that Nigerians, we will have, some high level of conviction around the plans of the government to really make a positive change in this administration. And I think, possibly I would like to comment around, our expectations and the way we have, been criticizing, this government. This government is just, 2 months old, and I'm not sure we have seen any administration that has been excessively criticized, like that of, Tinubu. So my sense is, the government is not fully formed. By the time we have, the ministers in place, then we can begin to say that, we have, a full cabinet. And before we can see positive changes, we can analyze matters from now till tomorrow without stopping.
Okay.
But the reality is that, those changes wouldn't come overnight.
Okay, Tajuddin, I don't know if you're exactly right in terms of if this administration has been criticized enough. We are all in this country when President Buhari was president, and I remember I was still doing the show then, and it took 6 months for President Buhari to get ministers, and we saw a lot of things are happening. 2015, the economy was dwindling. 2016, we went into a recession. So Tajuddin, we're still in this country, as it were. Mr. President said he will hit the ground running, and he did not. He asked for the job, so he should respect whatever Nigerians are saying at this time. But let me get your quick view on labor. What do you think that labor would do at the end of their meeting today? They've told Nigerians, go buy, stock your houses and all of this, all of that. These are Nigerians that live on less than $1.90 a day. These are Nigerians that the World Bank has actually said that 8,000 naira is a lot for a family that lives on $1.90 a day. Very quickly, we've got to go in like 40 seconds.
Look, I think labor needs to be constructed. I don't think going on a strike is a solution to the problem. I think labor needs to ask the president questions about labor laws. Yeah, wage indexation, employee casualization, because if you increase minimum wage from the federal level for the civil servant and state civil servant and public servant, it doesn't impact the security guard on the road or the Mishai or the POS operator on the road. You need to ask questions about labor laws. That's the elephant in the room to actually raising the wages of people in especially unorganized labor. People who are not members of Pengasen or members of Association of Bank Staffs of Nigeria. People who don't have any union talking for them in rooms where it matters and protecting them.
Review.
These are the questions labor should be asking themselves, not telling people to go on strike, especially when you consider how much suffering there is already in the land.
All right. I think we'll leave it at that. We'll continue this conversation another time. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Kelvin Emmanuel is the Chief Executive Officer at Dairy Hills, and Tajuddin Ibrahim is the Director of Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill, Denham. Thank you, Tajuddin, for joining us. And that's the much we can take on today's edition of the program. The conversation will definitely continue. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. Don't forget that, of course, AIT will bring you the ministerial screening from the National Assembly when it starts. I am Nancy Naji. Bye now.